After Adam and Eve sinned, God began to reveal his plan to save mankind from the consequences of sin by sending a deliverer called the Messiah to conquer Satan and restore humanity to himself. God later promised the Israelites that the Messiah would be one of their descendants. Over time, God made the identity of this Messiah more clear by sending prophets who would reveal details about who the Messiah would be so that the Israelites would recognize him when he arrived. Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah that God promised to Israel. However, most Jews rejected Jesus as their Messiah, and some still wait for his arrival to this day. In this video, we will see how Jesus fulfilled the messianic prophecies and why, despite this, most Jews reject Jesus as the Messiah. We will start by looking at the prophecies regarding the Messiah's birth. Isaiah prophesied that he would be born of a virgin, while Micah shared that he would be born in Bethlehem. Just as the prophets said, Jesus was born from the Virgin Mary in the town of Bethlehem. God promised that the Messiah would come from among Abraham, Judah, and David's descendants. The Gospel of Matthew begins with a lineage of Jesus tracing his ancestry back through David, Judah, and Abraham. These prophecies carried into the Messiah's ministry. For example, Isaiah said that the Messiah would be preceded by a messenger. He would cure the blind, deaf, mute, and lame, and he would be a light to the Gentiles. All of these prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus. The prophets even shared that the Messiah would be rejected by the Israelites. He would be beaten beyond recognition and pierced for our sins. He would be mocked and spit on. His friends would abandon him in his hour of need, and he would be led like a lamb to the slaughter. Ultimately, he would die, but through his death, he would redeem sinners. He would triumph over death by rising from the dead. Jesus perfectly fulfills all of these prophecies about the Messiah's rejection and suffering. Daniel even cites when the Messiah would arrive. His dating comes to around 32 AD, right around the time that Jesus entered into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey and was welcomed as Israel's king. Despite Jesus' fulfillment of these prophecies, many Jews reject him as their Messiah. Why is this? Possibly the misunderstanding comes from how Jesus made his arrival. Jesus was a humble carpenter who did not fit the description of many other messianic prophecies. The Messiah was expected to be a conquering king who would save Israel from their oppressors. He would bring peace to creation and judge mankind for their sins. He would usher in a new heaven and new earth and reign over all things. Christians believe that these prophecies will be fulfilled when Jesus returns, but many Jews were expecting the Messiah to arrive as the conquering king right away. There is evidence of this in a text that the Jews composed around 80 years before Jesus' ministry began, called the Psalms of Solomon. In this text, the Jews write about how the Messiah will judge all the nations of the earth, drive out the foreign nations that occupied Jerusalem, and gather the Israelites into his kingdom, which he will reign over. They failed to take into account the prophecies that said the Messiah must first suffer and die as a meek and humble servant. It might be helpful if we split the messianic prophecies into two categories, one referring to the Messiah's first coming as the suffering servant, and the other to his second coming as the conquering king. The Messiah had to suffer in order to resolve the biggest problem facing humanity, that we are sinners that stand condemned before a holy and just God. Without the Messiah's death for our sins, we could not have the conquering king that was promised. God, in his wisdom and mercy, decided to have the Messiah arrive first as a suffering servant who took away the sins of the world, and then give people time to accept his payment for their sins. Messiah Jesus will return soon, only this time it will be as the conquering king that was promised. We should eagerly prepare for and await that day.